Happy New Year, all of that stuff, because I've missed 2 weeks because I was in Ireland doing my tour 1 week, and then last week I missed it because of the celebrations, which is unusual for me. So apologies, and I hope that we're all okay and that we survived Christmas. I do have a puppy on my lap, I'm not going to lie, because it tends to walk around the room and she'll just eat stuff. And I can't have a choking situation during this mental health live. It will be bad for all of us, me included, particularly if I fail the Heimlich manoeuvre on the puppy. So I'm just putting it out there. If there's a furry thing that keeps appearing, it's nothing to do with me physically. It's definitely a separate entity. Hope we've all survived. I've cooked 67 Christmas dinners so far, and I'm absolutely exhausted with the idea of cooking any more for said 12 months. I imagine that many of us are reciprocating such feelings at the moment. Also, how are we still talking about quite a lot of the same stuff nearly 2 years on? Although, in other news, I think we can all feel very rest assured and super peaceful about the fact that Tony Blair's got a knighthood. For me, personally, I think if I'm going to really consider people who have done amazing things for the world, really, one of the things that I'm going to go for is somebody who's peaceful, hasn't caused any major incidences or potentially increased global terrorism, been responsible for millions of people who should never have died, and the fall of a particular situation that has led to women being horribly abused in the world in certain areas. But, you know, as long as that isn't the case, why wouldn't we give them a knighthood? I'm going for one next year. Just going to go for one. Why not? Sir Emma goes well. Sir Emma. Do you know what I mean? Say it fast as well. Don't even need to say Sir Emma Kenny. Just Sir Emma. There you go. Hashtag Sir Emma. Sir Emma. Just saying. When it comes down to it, on a scale of damage I've done compared to damage they've done, I reckon I should definitely be in with a chance. Just putting it out there, if that's the level. Sorry, starting with my sarcasm, apologies. I do have lots of questions that have come in, and then, as I've said, apologies for not being around for 2 weeks. It will not happen again. I am back like the Renegade Master. Also, before I start, might start sweating because I also have a rug on my legs so that the puppy is comfortable. You can imagine what it was like when I had a child as well, can't you? Literally, I'd be doing this mental health live now with a baby stuck to my ear. It's just always attachment parents, just the way I am. Let's go. And like I said, Facebook isn't up and running on the live this week for the next 2 weeks, I think, because I got a ban for basically Pete sharing a picture of somebody who was a murderer, because I do crime channels on YouTube, and essentially somebody reported that as me like celebrating the murderer. Obviously it wasn't correct, but Facebook really don't care whether the community standards are real or otherwise. They just make it up as they go along. So apologies, I will be back on there in 2 weeks. If you want to get in touch tonight, you can still get in touch on Facebook. So for the private messages, it's still a good one because it's completely confidential, but otherwise you can just ask questions as we go along. There we go. I shall commence. Any advice on a sibling who is distant with connecting with family, but is very social media orientated and self-loathing? So I don't know whether you're saying sibling of yours or whether you have a sibling as in a child who is the sibling and therefore is that way. And I also don't necessarily know the age of this person, but I'm going to acknowledge it's probably 13 plus on the fact that they are on social media. So a few things have been found out about, well, actually, before I even say that, I'm going to say this. We don't really know how social media is affecting us. Like, we don't have the research. It's only been around a few decades. It could be catastrophic. I don't know. Certainly in the past few years, I think we can all agree that if social media hadn't been here, on one level, it'd be terrible because we wouldn't all get to do this. And I've met amazing human beings and have an incredibly supportive community. But also, it kind of corroborates to do things like cancel really important people for doing one thing that people disagree with, or destroying certain scenarios because enough people are paid to do so, or keeping something going potentially that's really not great for humanity, but because it makes money, you can. So there are lots of things that we know it might not be good about, and also we don't know the long-term impact on the brain. There are people who'll be studying this, but again, it's big business. Where there's big business, usually the studies that may surprise you guys, but usually if you do research really diligently on where studies come from, often you can find the studies are funded by the very people who need those studies to be very favourable towards the studies finding in the favour of the people that are funding them. Just putting it out there. So again, even that isn't necessarily enough to tell us what kind of impact it's going to have. So first off, before I say research has shown, the minimal research that has been done in this area that I suppose is as individual as it can be, as in not necessarily funded by people who want you to say positive things, says that there are some issues around increasing levels of narcissism that may be temporary, or also lacks of empathy. So a lack of empathy, like a kind of a division of that kind of empathy within human beings. And on one level, that might be very temporary. Like I said, it could just be whilst people are engaged heavily in it because you're thinking more about the ego and the self and presenting yourself in a certain way. And on the other side, of course, it could be that deep insecurities are being affected. And even when we feel really insecure, that can come across quite egotistical at times, because often, even though narcissism is obviously very different to somebody who's deeply insecure, if you think about how it comes across, well, if you're quite narcissistic, and we're not talking about personality disorder here, we're talking about just some traits that are a bit narcissistic, like spending a lot of time editing your photographs, making yourself look perfect, trying to pretend that your life is amazing, lying to people about your life, and not really caring about the impact they have on other people, more concerned about likes and value of relationships around you. Those kind of things are not great, are they? So on one level, you could say, well, that's quite narcissistic, and that person doing that seems that way. Equally, it could be that somebody's highly insecure because the traits and behaviours are kind of similar. You'd spend a lot of time looking at yourself, trying to make yourself look better, trying to suggest that your life is better because you just don't really like your life at all. So on either spectrum, the problem is it's going to make that person a little bit more isolated. They'll seem more egocentric. They'll certainly be more withdrawn because they're concentrating so much focus on this mythical world as opposed to this physical world. And when you've got young people as well, the other thing is their brain's going through so many different developmental stages. So all the way up until 25, we know that the brain is changing, and pretty much any variable that you introduce to that brain is going to have an impact. So social media, particularly from a young age, directs our attention in a different way, meaning that, like it or otherwise, it's going to have a knock-on effect and impact to other things. So if you look at a lot of young girls who are in Australia, for example, you'll see pictures of them with no makeup on the beach, looking windswept, maybe just about to go surfing, because the world there applies itself to that narrative. In the UK, we've got more of The Only Way is Essex and those kind of lots and lots that people kind of aspire to have, and therefore there's a different pressure and circumstance on people here. So that lecture over, the point is, what do you do if you have a young person or a younger adult who seems to be obsessed with social media and they're withdrawing from the family? So there's a few questions I'd ask myself first of all. Number one is, like, you all have to be volunteers in that situation. And that's not me being judgmental. You all have to be volunteers. To participate in that narrative we're talking about, we're all volunteers. So the person who's on social media all the time, withdrawing from the family, that's a volunteer. The person who's not, grabbing that person and saying, right, fundamentally this isn't working and we're going to do A, B and C to offer you better options so that when you have an option to go on social media or do A, B and C, which are interesting to you and are passionate from you, then we're going to make the choices to do that together. That way you're kind of colliding with each other in a positive way and collaborating emotionally and physically and socially in a way that means that that individual can engage, because everyone has different interests. And to some young people, social media is actually a career. I mean, with respect, it's the number one job that young people say that they want, to be an influencer. And it's not because they're lazy and stupid, quite the contrary, it's that they know there's a lot of money, and secondly, they work for themselves. So there are lots of reasons why entrepreneurial spirit means that they engage in that way. Also, there's a lot of people that they feel familiar with online. So if you're feeling a little bit out of sorts with your family, maybe you're in a situation where you don't feel that you connect effectively with the whole family, you feel a little bit more distant, but there are people that you look at online and you're like, well, actually they remind me of me, then essentially that familiarity breeds that connection, and a connection can feel, whether it's real or otherwise, incredibly full. So again, it's about, okay, well, what is it that they're getting here that they aren't getting here? And when you kind of look at the gaps, and inevitably there always are. My husband and I were talking last night because we had a very rare night at my brother's house. We go there sometimes. He just serves us. It's like having a very laid-back butler, I'm not going to lie. There's usually a selection of foods which are very tasty, and I just sit there until I go to sleep. Usually it's a very relatively good hour, probably before 11 o'clock every time. But I was talking at that moment in time about my youngest son, who is far more withdrawn than my eldest son, in a way that at times I think I need to kind of really broach. I need to kind of deal with that. And on one level, it's almost easy to say, well, that's the young person who's going through difficult times, 17's hard, and so on and so forth, lots of pressures. But sometimes that narrative interrupts the reality of what we're dealing with. It's like, well, all of that is collateral noise. It's all happening. This is for all our relationships, by the way, guys. It's not just about this one in particular. It's the question we need to ask ourselves sometimes. We give ourselves a lot of excuses around why something or somebody is acting or being in a certain way. And often that lends itself to the sense of, well, what can I really do? Therefore, I can just acknowledge that they'll move forward, they'll get through it, things will change, it's just the way they are. But maybe it would be better if we were like, okay, so the bit that I can control in this is that I have noticed that this behavior has shifted and changed. I have noticed there is more withdrawal. I have noticed this sense of this individual maybe not feeling as connected to the family. And I'm noticing that. So I'm getting this emotional prompt. This emotional prompt is knocking on my door and saying, that's not feeling okay. Something's changed. And the great thing about that is that you know that, well, if something's changed, it can change back again, or at least to a new position that's better for everybody involved. So arguably with that sibling, I'd be slowly and surely trying to figure out what is it they really love doing? How do I connect with them over that? So for me, it might just be that I'll go up and sit in my son's room on his bed and just watch really rubbish TikTok videos that just make me question the worth of the world. But at least I'll look like I'm acknowledging that I'm connecting with him in this way whilst I'm setting them on fire in my head and he's just like really enjoying them. The point is you can collaborate and connect in that way. Secondly, make it non-choice based. I know that might seem difficult because particularly if you've got younger people, younger adults, it's like how? Well, because sharing space and time shouldn't be an option when it's family. You should have to create some space and time together. So that will be just making sure that you go in and say, look, this is what we're going to do and this is when we're going to do it. I don't even need to give you a why. It's just like, this is what we're going to do, this is when we're going to do it. I do it all the time. So, yesterday my kids had a chance to go out and I was like, right, we're going out to have some food. It's just simply making sure that you're not that volunteer in the withdrawal. So yeah, in all relationships, you should do that. Remember, most of us are in situations where if we accept the circumstances, we're volunteering for them and we can change them by not doing that, is what I'd say. Sorry, I tried to make that more generic as well because I wasn't sure whether I was talking about a child or a sibling, but either way, I hope it's applied to relationships per se. I've just started cat therapy for my EUPD. Have you very much experience of this therapy? Anxiety is high end and hard to fight. I'm going to assume we're talking cognitive analytical therapy at this moment in time, in which case, yes, I have experience of it. And yes, I do think that it can be helpful, like any therapy. And the reason I'm saying that is because essentially you've had EUPD, you've got EUPD. Arguably, I'd say with EUPD, a lot of the time that can be trauma-based. So a lot of people who research this area believe that there is a traumatic reasoning behind the development of EUPD. So emotional unstable personality disorder, for those of you who don't know, often people will also interchange things like borderline personality disorder, but they tend to be a little bit distinct. But nonetheless, self-regulation, emotional regulation can be more problematic. This idea that the individual is just seeking drama is ridiculous. This is something that is very much localized at times to somebody having had horrible circumstances, horrible experiences. So anything that can really help you work through that trauma in a safe place will firstly, of course, reduce anxiety, because you're acknowledging something so you can change it. And then on top of that, you're moving through that with somebody who's firstly going to be completely on your side and devoted to that experience with you and go on that journey with you. And most importantly, is going to help you to kind of analyze and work through what it is needing to be worked through. There are lots of other therapies that people use trauma-based work with. So schema therapy is something that people will often use. And also I will say EMDR. So EMDR is another trauma therapy that can be really, really effective. Again, whenever I say about EMDR, it's always good to look online at things like HCPC, because I'll have clinical psychologists who will be specialist trained in EMDR, and also MBACP, so the British Association of Psychotherapy and Counselling. And counselling psychotherapy, even that's mine. Basically, they also have people who are accredited who are EMDR, so you can look for those. But like I said, cognitive analytical therapy is great, and I'm a massive believer that it's to do with the relationship at times more than it is even to do with the therapy. You get somebody that you just fit with, connect with, then arguably you're going to be in a really good space to explore that. So yeah, and good on you for going for therapy. It's great. Like I said, if it doesn't have the effect and impact that you want, don't give up. Honestly, that's one of the biggest problems in therapeutic practice. What will happen is you'll go and see one practitioner and you'll be like, oh, it'll never work for me because it didn't work for me there. And it's like, it's so different with different people. So never give up on that. Always move through that and kind of be like, okay, this one wasn't quite right, but this is going to be something that I'm going to pursue until I find the right fit. And you will find the right fit in the end. And hopefully this is the one that you've got already. As a therapist myself, I find myself feeling quite lonely due to having a different mindset to a lot of the people around me. I find that quite hard. How do you work with that? I totally relate to that. So, like on an existential level as well as an internal, personal level. But just to go through that again in my head so I've got it right. As a therapist myself, I find myself feeling quite lonely due to having a different mindset to a lot of the people around me. I find that quite hard. How do you work with that? Okay, so I guess one of the most important things is that when we train as practitioners, I think we spend a lot of time really thinking about other people's worlds, because that's part and parcel of our developing congruence, empathy, unconditional positive regard. And usually when you do therapy, you start off in the Rogers-Egan system. It's as simple as that. So you're kind of brought into this minute detail about being and the presence of another's being and how you can kind of work with that and synergize with that, etc. And I think that also you're drawn into the field, at least if you are a good practitioner. Not all are, and certainly not all should be in the field. But for those of us who should be, you're drawn into the field because you genuinely feel that you want to share another's pain and journey, and there's a privilege to that experience. So then we can say there's a more agreeable personality. So if you've got an agreeable personality trait, and on top of that, you're very sensitive to the world around you because you want to make a positive impact, then arguably you can spend a period of time within your psyche analysing everything going on around you to try to prevent yourself having an impact of harm. And so because of that, you then, I suppose to some degree, fast forward analysis, meaning that you're quick to decipher situations and scenarios that others maybe are taking longer to process because they might be doing something entirely different to you, far better than I would ever be able to do, but therefore they're good at something I don't see and I'm good at something they don't see. But because of that, well, of course there can be a level of alienation because everyone has a gift. Everyone has a gift. And one of the biggest fundamental flaws in the Western experience and education system, in my belief system, is that we forget to teach people the divergency of our gifts. It's as simple as that. So if I measure my husband against me and I say, well, at the end of the day, Pete cannot communicate in the same style as me. Emotionally, he's not able to express himself in the same way as me. Well, automatically he's failing in my comparison base and he can't meet my needs because I'm measuring him on those traits. And arguably that's going to mean that I always feel like I'm losing and he always feels like he's losing because essentially I'm measuring him on a broken system, right? And I think we do that sometimes when we forget to embrace the fact that we got these special gifts according to whoever we were in our uniqueness. So by the way, my husband, if I measure him on a human capacity and somebody who can actually do a multitude of tasks, I mean, he aces me 96% of the time. I can speak, listen, problem solve, string a sentence together and understand the way that people work in a certain way, in a certain paradigm, right? Because I can see that more clearly now as I've got older, because let's be honest, getting old, the only benefit is you kind of go through the motions so much that you kind of let go of some of the things you thought were really important to create space for things that really are important. So the loneliness actually for me now is my uniqueness. And there's two ways I deal with that. So in therapy, we talk about the shadow self, the bit within us that always feels like, using the word existential, even though it's internal, existentially lonely. Like this solitude, this unique place that no one else can reach. There's a place that you were born, you die. It's gonna be you by yourself in the headlights, nothing you can do about it, right? Doesn't matter who else is there, it's your journey. And it's almost like a making of peace with that. It's a sense of, oh, hang on, I don't want all of those to get me how I get them. Because if I do, then I can't have my purpose. Like, this is my purpose. This is it. Like, when it comes down to it, as a practitioner and speaking to a fellow practitioner, and actually to anybody who's listening with empathy, who has that level of empathy where you just kind of analyze the world and you can feel it when it's happening and you know that you're the solution provider a lot of the times in your family and so on and so forth. It's not just practitioners. We can all feel like that. That kind of feeling is within us. It's owning it and being like, no, this isn't loneliness. This is uniqueness. This is my gift. And I don't get to have that from everybody else because I'm the one channeling it. And then instead of it feeling lonely, it feels kind of a silent peace is what I'd express. This is only my interpretation of it. Of course, yours may be very different. But I found that very welcoming when I started to work through that. And now the part of me that no one can reach is like my most precious self. And my expectations of others are so different because I'm learning to measure them on what they're great at, not what I need them to be. And that's helped enormously in my life per se. I have this saying. It is not my saying, by the way. It's definitely some saying that I've picked up from some professional along the way. And it just goes, everyone is doing their best. Just sometimes their best isn't your good enough. And it really helps me in those moments. So when you feel that solitude and loneliness and that alienation, just remember that that's because you're here for a special purpose and that's your gift. And you kind of need to start acknowledging that that's a beautiful thing, whilst equally acknowledging that when that person cooks you an amazing pasta, or when that person gives you amazing directions that you actually understand, or when that person comes over and gives you a gorgeous hug when you're having a difficult moment, maybe that's their measurement that you should be using. That's what I'd say. But I totally concur with your feelings entirely. It's why I look for mentors a lot in my life. It's why I'm constantly listening to different professionals speak and why I'm constantly listening to different ideas. And, you know, those things really help because it's like, sometimes that bit of me that feels alienated is just really looking for a higher mentor to go elsewhere to just kind of lose myself a little bit in that space and time and learning and growth. I am too similar. I like this. He's done very well. He's written too similar. So apologies if these aren't you ideally as to the question that you've asked, but they've kind of mingled them together. How do you cope with your mental health? You help so many, but how do you cope? Well, it's a two-way thing really, just to say, when people say you help so many, like I really appreciate that, but arguably, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have you guys and it wasn't helpful. I think everyone's got a purpose and you give me mine. So it's definitely an exchange that works very effectively and efficiently for me and keeps me sharp and also reminds me of the amazing amount of issues that we all face and how similar we are constantly because most people are going through these things. So I cope because firstly, I feel this is what I'm meant to do. Secondly, I walk every day. I've not done it for 2 days, which is a disaster because I've just had these situations occur and unfold that weren't meant to happen. But I've had 2 days of not walking. And even though they've been nice scenarios as to why I haven't walked, that does start to play with my brain. And I'm like, you need to get out immediately and just go for a 6-mile walk. So me and Pete do that. We find time every day so that we can connect and so that we can just kind of talk shit, if I'm honest. I was going to say something deep then. We just talk shit. We carry 2 dogs. We stop off at Tesco and get a Ribena. We're very, very, very habit orientated. We buy some dog chews for the dogs that we're carrying because we get walked by the dogs and not the other way around. And then we follow the same route and we look like the odd couple wearing body warmers with chihuahuas sticking out. It's strange because if I'd seen people like us when I was young, I'd be like, they are so weird. And actually, it's probably a correct assumption to make. We are a bit weird. But the point is I go walking and I say to everybody I've ever come into contact with, if you do a week walking and then you come back to me and say that your mental health is worse, I know you won't have been walking. It might not be exceeding itself, but it will be better. So that will be something I do. I talk a lot to people. I like expressing myself. Also, another thing that I do that not everybody does, I have a lot of chats with me. I write things down. I literally can type things sometimes on Instagram, sometimes just in my notes, sometimes I'll write it. Sometimes I'll just speak in accents to myself out loud. Believe me, they're really interesting. And I am quite good at an Irish and a Scottish accent, and quite good at a Liverpool accent as well. So sometimes American as well. So what I'm saying is, all those, which might seem bizarre, but everyone has a way of coping, right? So there. And then the other one is, yeah, I don't know, like, how I would express my mental health being something that I look after, aside from to say that because I've done therapy for years, it's just a constant process where you're just constantly thinking about how to promote a better sense of well-being. And I'm totally back where I started years ago. It's another thing I'd say to all of you. The last few years, if there's a bit of advice I can give you, genuinely, the last few years have been really traumatizing. They've been really hard. They've been really dividing. A lot of us are dealing with what I would consider secondary trauma. A lot of people are dealing with having lost people through a whole range of situations and circumstances. A lot of people have felt that their health has got worse, and so on and so forth. And also, I think there's been like a stagnancy. One of the things I'm really noticing at the moment is a sense of stagnancy. I was having a conversation with somebody today about that. This sense of feeling either suffocated, that the world feels quite entrapped now, or also that you don't feel you've moved on and progressed. And I've got 15 and a 17-year-old kids who became 17 and 19. I feel like I had 2 young boys and they are men, and it happened in the last 2 years and it has been stolen. And so many of us are feeling like that. So when it comes down to mental health, I look back before my dad's suicide, before my best friend died, really 4.5, 5 years ago. And I genuinely thought I knew me. And I think a lot of us feel that. You know, we get to this point in our life where we think we know who we are. We've kind of adjusted, we've worked it out, we've got our shit together. And then, boom, this happens, loss happens, things out of your control happen. And on one level, it can feel catastrophic, alienating, isolating, frustrating, anger, infuriating, all of these things. And then if you stick with that, then obviously it's really negative. But if you just take that and you're like, okay, this is the hardest it's ever going to be. This is the most terrifying. This is the most tragic. And then you're like, what is it that I'm going to learn from this? And now this does not excuse or make easy the loss or the tragedy. It doesn't, of course not. Nothing ever will. But what it does is it takes it and it gives it some purpose and legacy. And when something that can feel incredibly scary and terrifying and sad and traumatizing can become something that brings you progression and movement and change and challenge and growth and development, even when you're still stuck. So even though I'm still stuck, and so many of you are still stuck here, there's been so many changes that a lot of us, even though it still feels like, wow, there's a stagnancy, you can feel that within you there is this like desire for something to change and transition. And out there right now are the keys and the doors that will lead you to those changes. It's just that they haven't quite slotted into the right slots. But just know that all of those feelings that I'm talking about at the moment, those frustrations in particular, that stagnancy that's moving forward, that is crying out for progression. So even in the darkest and most disastrous of moments, usually we're being served our most enlightened experiences and changes and growth. It's something I truly believe in. It's something I live. And no, I'm not doing the Scottish accent. Thank you. There are enough stupid things online going round with my face in. Need I say more? I'll do it privately sometime. Do a Zoom with Emma, different accents. I'll tell you who is really good. If you want to see somebody who's amazing at accents, it's a girl called Holly. What's Holly's second name? I'll find it for you, right? Holly Matthews. Holly Matthews. She used to be in Waterloo Road. She's absolutely brilliant. She's actually a Geordie, but you wouldn't know when she does her accent. So if you really want to see somebody great at accents, I'm always somebody to shout somebody, go and look up her. She's got a YouTube channel. Waterloo Road. Oh, Bite a Grove. That was not a good accent, but never mind. It's the one I struggle with. Question. Do you have any tips on how I can overcome limerence? Limerence. Feel like it's ruining my life. Thanks for continuing to do these sessions. They've really helped me throughout the pandemic. Okay, so limerence, you're talking about obsessive thoughts about somebody that potentially you feel attracted to, but that you're not necessarily receiving any kind of love back. So when I think about that particular word, I'm imagining that there is either somebody in your life that you spend time with that you really wish you could have a relationship with, but they're not actually allowing you to have that relationship. Or it could be even somebody that you don't necessarily know that well, but you just have like these fundamental thoughts towards them. Like, so I've worked with people who had real infatuations with a doctor, for example, and it was very much a one-way relationship, but it felt real to them. And obviously, I'm not saying for 1 minute that you have some kind of strange fixation at all. I'm just saying that this can be something that can be very consuming. So I'm going to assume that's what you're talking about. And there's a few things. So first of all, if it's in a relationship with somebody that you actually really do know and have good connections with and spend time with, but you know it's going to go nowhere, well, that's really painful. Of course it is. And it's more difficult to deal with than, say, you are obsessed with somebody that you see every morning, excuse me, every morning when you have coffee, you know, the cute bartender or whatever, or the barrister. You know, that's easier because honestly, I'd be advising you to do things like, if you knew that there was no chance of it happening, maybe getting a coffee somewhere else or taking a different walk to work, because it can be really painful when you're in a situation where you keep opening the wound because you're seeing somebody that you find really attractive and that you've built in a fantasy towards. If, however, it is to do with somebody that you have a common experience with, so it could be a really great friend or a friend's boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, that can be challenging, because on one level you don't want to let go of the relationship if it has meaning, and on another level it can feel deeply frustrating and upsetting if you know that they're loving someone else or they're spending time with someone else, or arguably they're spending loads of time with you but they don't want to take it to any other level than friendship. And I suppose the crux of this feeling is a twofold experience. On one level, you can experience it until you fall for somebody else, right? So some people will have this sense of unrequited love, a bit like Chaucerian courtly love, shall we say, where no matter what you do, they're never going to be yours. And you'd do anything, you'd move a mountain, you know, you'd swim across the ocean, but they're never going to be yours. And it's like, fundamentally, it's a useless waste of time, but you still have these feelings. So arguably, when somebody else walks into your life, that displaces that. Because remember, a lot of the feelings that we have about a relationship with somebody else are a fantasy. So we're very attracted to them. We want to have sex with them generally, and we certainly want to spend time with them. They're the kind of three fundamentals. And we imagine that this would play out beautifully if we ended up in a relationship with them. Of course we do. That's why we end up getting involved in relationships. It's also why a lot of relationships fail, because we build up pictures of possibilities and they don't play out. We build up pictures of possibilities and they fundamentally can't fulfill the fantasy. The individual doesn't have the same agreeability or value system or whatever it is that connects us. We're not interested in the same things. It turns out that we didn't really have what we thought we'd had because we build a picture of possibility. So it's your picture of possibility that is amplified at this moment in time. And that amplification is to some degree something you can control. So if you absolutely know that you cannot, under any circumstances, be in a relationship with this person and it's affecting your lives because you're fixated on them and obsessing about them, then arguably you have to firstly tone down the fantasy, which is okay, how much of this is real? How much of this is added value that I'm creating? So when you're imagining the perfect relationship, where's your real evidence for it? Because first of all, they're not engaging with you. So in this moment, this perfect relationship is very imperfect because they're not engaged in it. So it's a one-way street. Secondly, you're absolutely idolizing them because of this obsession fixation. So therefore, you've amplified all of their positive traits. We do that. That's why when people get into relationships, they're like, oh, the way he eats is so quirky. And then like a year down the line, it's like the person's just trying not to stab the person with the butter knife because they're eating the way that they thought was quirky a year before, because now they've seen all the other things that kind of annoy them a bit. So it's also how much can you tone down the things that you really have built up to be this perfect picture of possibility to actually see it in more realistic perspective, because that will help as well. Then what is missing in your world right now? And that isn't a judgment, and it's not me saying that there's something wrong with you. I'm just saying that when we have all this time to kind of devote to this particular belief system, we're avoiding other things in our world. It's kind of taking the place of something. And it might be that actually the fundamental need in you is, I need connection. It sounds like it will be. I need connection. I need somebody who makes me feel beautiful or handsome. I need somebody who makes me feel like I'm valuable. I need somebody who makes me feel that I'm noticed, I'm visible. people. And actually, at this moment in time, you haven't got that elsewhere. So you go, well, if just this person could do it, it would all be okay. So again, it's about, okay, let's expand our opportunities and interests. Like, what can we fill our world with to close down some of that amplification and fixation and obsession? Now, aside from all of that, you can work on really thinking about therapy if it's really, really to the point where it's interfering with your everyday tasks and activities, where it's making you not be able to concentrate, where you feel like you literally won't entertain the opportunity to date other people and so on and so forth. Because again, it might be that you need to explore a little bit more about, okay, wait a minute, why am I going for somebody who I can't have? Like, on one level, you could say, well, because I find him really attractive and I want this to happen, and even though it won't happen, I still can't help myself. On another level, you could be like, okay, that's a really strong defense mechanism. I mean, that's a really strong defense mechanism. If I've got all of this love to give, all of this joy, all of this play, all of this attention, all of this value, and I could just give it to somebody, and I'm going to give it to the person who's never going to want it. I mean, wow, if you've got a defense mechanism, that's effective, isn't it? Because it's going to keep you completely safe. You know, you'll be frustrated, you'll be obsessive, you'll concentrate all your romantic focus on them, but really you'll be like, but I'm never actually going to get it. So on one level, yes, it's frustrating, but on another level, it's like, well, I'm never going to have a relationship. I'm never going to have to commit. I'm never going to have a grown-up responsibility. I'm never going to let this fail because I'm never going to have it. So they're big questions to ask as well. So hopefully I've covered that enough. Obviously, it's a much broader problem, by the way. I mean, hopefully I've given you some food for thought within that and analysed both sides of it, which felt important. I've had some horrific experiences as I was growing up. I just carried on. But now at 53, I get a scary feeling of smelling and tasting. Don't know what from. It lasts seconds, but can often repeat often. Can you help me, please? I find it hard to go to the doctors, thank you. I've had some horrific experiences as I was growing up. I just carried it on, but now at 53, I get a scary feeling of smelling and tasting. Don't know what from. It lasts seconds, but can repeat often. Can you help me, please, as I find it hard to go to the doctors? So first of all, I don't know whether that's physical or psychological. And the reason I'm putting that caveat in is if you don't like going to the doctors, I appreciate that. Particularly at the moment, it can be quite challenging. And I don't necessarily think you need to go to the doctors at this moment in time, because I think most of the time they're just giving you a phone call or they're doing a video call. So first off, because it might be physical and it's a taste and a smell, then certainly it's worth having a conversation with your doctor, because you don't want to ever be in a situation where you ignore physical symptoms. And even though the likelihood is there isn't a problem with that, always get it checked out. I genuinely can't on a medical level say what's going on there. If you're talking about the fact that what's happening at the moment is at 53 years old, you're reflecting on the fact that your life was really challenging. I'm really sorry your childhood was like that. It's a constant sadness for me that so many people have had traumatic upbringings. No child deserves it. And the fact that you're 53 now doesn't change the fact that you would have been a child when you needed the love and care that your primary caregivers should have given you. And like at the end of the day, traumatized children grow into traumatized adults at times because we don't tend to resolve it because the resources aren't there, and often we don't even realize that we're traumatized until we're at a point of reflection as adults. So it may be that as you've got older, you've started to recognize, hang on, that wasn't okay, or you've had your own children potentially and you're like, this is how you should feel towards kids, and so on and so forth. And they can be re-traumatizing events because you're like, wow, now I see just how challenging it was for me as a child. And you kind of relive and rethink that whole situation again and again. So that's re-traumatizing. And then when you think about smell and taste, well, fundamentally, smell and taste are anchors. So we use smell in particularly in anxiety work where, let's take, for example, a nervous child is moving to a new address and the parent understands that that child is going to have some issues with reforming a relationship with the new environment because of their anxiety. So we'll do things like put a peppermint diffuser in the house for a few weeks before they move, and then when they get in the new house they put that on. The child has an opportunity to reorientate itself through the smell. So the anxiety is there, but to a lesser degree because we've created this situation. So it's very powerful, an anchor or a trigger, depending on which one it is. An anchor being the one that we form, a trigger being one that is triggered because we've had an experience prior to this. That sounds to me like something that could be happening for you. Something that was going on at a space and time in your life potentially where there were strong smells or tastes, and even though you're not necessarily smelling or tasting it in that moment, you have a memory of it. And maybe at a moment where you're panicking, it's triggering this moment of experiencing what we would consider like the smell and taste, because your brain is like going back to that moment. So if that's the case, again, it's not that you have to speak to your doctor about it, but I'd always argue that if you've had trauma in your life and you're starting to have any kind of experience that is refactoring in that experience of the primary abuse or the primary trauma or whatever it was, then your brain's going there for a reason, and it could be readiness to experience and explore what happened and to make peace with some of that pain. So that would be a good place to have a conversation with a doctor about getting some therapeutic intervention. You'll wait a long time, but it'll be worth it. It will be worth it. I promise it. It will be absolutely worth it, particularly if you can make peace with what happened to you as a young person, because it's really challenging. And we leave distance sometimes and imagine, oh, we shouldn't go back now. We just should get on with it. I'm 53, but you've still got half your life. Like, you want that half of your life to be, well, we've got more than that. When you think about it, you're 53. The average age is like 104 now. They're saying, well, hopefully at some point we're going to get to that point. That's what they're saying. 104 is going to be like a common age group for people of our age groups. So if you think about that, you've got another 45 years, onwards that realistically you could live again. You don't want to do that having negative experiences like this when you can make peace with them. Like, everything is reconditionable. The brain is not something that is conditioned and it's over. We recondition it constantly. Maybe this is your time to explore that stuff. But scent and smell, taste, it's very powerful. So like I said, there's probably something that's being unlocked. But unlocking it safely is a great place to start. And unlocking it safely with a professional who's trained to help you is also a really good place to start as well. How do you manage with in-laws? They're buried under the patio. They're not buried under the patio. Long story short, I decided to have Christmas on my own, which I loved and will do again. I like that. I love that. When people are like, which I loved and will do again. Appreciate that. Appreciate that it worked for you. And the in-laws went mad. I have no family of my own, and they've been a huge support system since I lost my mum suddenly a year and a half ago. Me and my partner have been trying to get pregnant, and his sister started at the same time. She always has to be first or outdo, and fell immediately. I'm still trying and just wanted a date where it wouldn't be in my face and that I'd failed to get pregnant so far. I said, if I don't go, can it just be about the new life growing as it shouldn't? Sorry, I said, if I don't go, then it can just be about the new life growing as it should be without awkwardness from me. Since then, they've been rude and mean about me, and I'm only trying as my partner is so close to them. I'm rarely selfish, and for my mental health, chose to remove myself from the situation. Was I wrong? Well, everybody's going to have a different perspective. And that's the way that you have to see these things. So when we advantage that situation, it's like, on one level, of course you weren't wrong. You're upset because you're not pregnant. Believe me, as a mother who has had years of IVF, and I've only got 2 kids, I should have had like 6. It's as simple as that. Like, I was born to have like multiple children, and I've had lots of miscarriages, and I've always had to have help getting pregnant. It's the most frustrating experience when like people just sneeze and get pregnant, right? That's how it feels, because for you it's very personal, for you it's harder, and it can feel really frustrating and challenging. And even when you see other people's happiness, it can be hard not to make it feel like it burns you. So from your perspective, you're like, well, I've been through a serious loss. You've lost your mum a year and a half ago, which must have been awful. And you're obviously young because you're trying to get pregnant. So you're probably late 20s, 30s. That's really challenging because you've not got a mum. And that's enough to just provoke not necessarily wanting to celebrate Christmas anyway. I would say a lot of us feel that way. In those early throes of grief, we just really don't care about social occasions, and certainly not about celebrations that are formulated by corporations that we're told to celebrate. But nonetheless, even though it's completely excusable and absolutely redeemable, these situations, when you think about it from their perspective, when you're saying that they've been there for you, they've been a huge support system, they love you. So they literally love you. You are their daughter-in-law, and they feel obviously a debt of gratitude towards you for the relationship that you've bestowed on them, and they reflect that in expectation from you. So the consequence is that even though you and I both know that you were completely within your rights to do that and they should just be empathic, they're just a bit bruised. They're just a bit hurt. Because they're like, why wouldn't you want to spend time with us? We love you. And they obviously have relationships with their son, and the consequence is that they therefore feel that they didn't get to see any of you, and that makes them feel a bit wounded. And when you bring in the thing about the sister, it's like on one level, you saying this should all be about new life and not about me, the girl who can't get pregnant, and I'm just gonna sit at home on my own. Even though on one level, that's like something that you're trying to get across in a positive way, they can easily interpret it as, oh, you're being bitter and you're making us feel bad for this situation. And arguably, we all want to be a family and we want good things for all of you, and so on and so forth. So no one's done anything wrong, not even the in-laws at all. It's more, look, this is totally redeemable. Why don't you just have a really honest conversation? Forget the, oh, she does it before me. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, her getting pregnant does not stop you having children. Her happiness does not steal from yours in the long term. Your baby will be the right baby for you when it comes at the point in time, and you'll be thrilled, and you wouldn't have it any other way, believe me. But equally, her pregnancy is still something to celebrate. It really is. It's a life, it's a new beginning, and you will have yours and she will have hers. And it's not a race. This is not a race. You're not in a competition. You're not a school sports day with this woman. You don't need to beat her, because you're going to have your child and it's going to be the perfect child for you. It's taking longer for you. You've had a lot of stress. It makes sense. You've had a lot of trauma. You've lost your mum. But when it comes down to her, I would say try to breathe that in and say, actually, this is my resentment at my body for not getting pregnant that I'm now projecting on her because she's found it easy. Now, take that back and be like, I need to make peace with my body and be like, I need to look after this body. I need not to be resentful of this body. I need to accept it's had lots of trauma. I need to be kind. I need to stop feeling angry with other people. I need to start focusing real self-care, because that body's going to carry a baby and you're going to need to make sure it's prepared for that. And so I would be concentrating on things like relaxation, getting some acupuncture, for example, which is shown to be brilliant with fertility. It's nice kind of approved for that. There are all these things that you can do that will be good to you. The stuff about feeling resentful and a bit bitter, which is completely understandable, but it won't make you feel good. And it won't be what you need to make yourself feel more prepared for what's going to be grueling when you get pregnant, because it's flipping grueling being pregnant. It's pretty hard work. So I would just say to your in-laws, look, the truth is, and I would say it to your sister-in-law, I'm really struggling not being pregnant. And I know that that probably came across as me just wanting to be on my own with my partner and alienate you. And actually, in truth, part of it was because at the moment I don't feel happy. And I thought I was going to ruin it for everybody because I wasn't feeling happy. And I hate not feeling happy. And I thought I'm going to take the pressure off myself from not feeling happy by just not seeing anyone. That's the very real way, because then they're like, oh, she's not happy. It wasn't about us at all. She knew that she was going to be a bit off on the day, and she just wanted to give herself space and us space so that wasn't the case. Instead of this, it's better for everyone because the baby's coming. That's not going to wash with anyone. It's far better to be like, it was better for me. I didn't come because it was better for me. It was totally about me. Yes, that came across as selfish, but it's because I'm not in the space where I have got the time or energy to devote to anybody else, because I've had a really hard year and a half and I love you so much for supporting me and I'm so grateful. Please support me now. Please just support me now. And understand that I love you very much. And that is a completely acceptable way of being. I keep saying, like, I've got a few phrases that I'm trying to kind of play with at the moment that work for me as far as what I need to do more of. And like, one is, it's better to tell the truth even when it's awkward. It's just better because you never have to remember it again. You just always tell the truth, right? It's not something that you have to make up and then elaborate on. It's just tell the truth. And the other one, I think I tweeted the other day, but I really stand by it, is like, take a risk on being unpopular sometimes. Because if you're unpopular for the right reasons, it's still the right reasons. And I think you need to do more of that. And then some inner peace and tranquility for you and your body. You've had a lot of trauma losing your mum and it's really difficult. And if you're trying to get pregnant, that's brilliant. But there's nothing wrong with taking Christmas Day off, but sometimes the reasons that we give for it is to be more specific and own it, and that can help as well. That's in life per se. Hi Emma, I'm a science teacher returning to school tomorrow after Christmas. Wow, I always wonder my sister's a teacher. So my sister's a teacher, she's a great teacher, but she always just like feels so devastated when she has to go back to work. Not because she doesn't love the kids, she's amazing, she's been a teacher for 35 years, but like, honestly, it's just the same as whenever she's going back to work. It's just that, oh, she loves being off obviously as well. And it's just that feeling of the Sunday night that I remember going back to school. You're very opposed to masks, particularly for the students. Some of my colleagues know this, and I wear an exempt badge. I would be exactly the same as you. Absolutely. My sons neither wear masks and both have, well, my eldest doesn't go anymore. My college completely understands that. They've had letters and reports and everything because I'm just avidly against it. Some of my colleagues know this and I will wear an exempt badge, but I hate that students will never be wearing masks in the classroom. I refuse to enforce them in my classroom, but I'm feeling so anxious about returning and whether to voice my concerns at school. I qualified September 2021 and I'm currently on a 12-month contract. Honestly, I think that a lot of people feel exactly the same as you. I don't think that there is anything wrong with voicing your concerns about the impact on development, about the impact on young people feeling that they are being brought up in a world where germs are becoming illegal and where health anxiety is being promoted at every single turn. At the same time, I don't think you should get into conflict about it because it's not your conflict, but you are definitely there to speak for those children. I think that's so true. So arguably, you've got a balance, haven't you? If you go in and you're like, masks are ridiculous, you're ruining children's lives, then obviously that's going to mean two things. One, there'll be people who are like, I really want masks, I believe in masks, I'm going to walk around in the visor, a mask and a plastic bag over my head, and I'm going to put a coat over it too. And then there'll be people who are like, I hate masks, you know, I don't want masks, and they're just like wearing it on the chin. And then there'll be people in between. I don't want to rock the boat, right? So what we don't want is polarities. Polarities are always the dangerous area. We want the grey area. So arguably, you're exempt. You let kids in your class, much like my son's college. There's a teacher who's awesome, and she just is like, just take them off. It's not happening. It's not right. But there are other people who are like very, very much about them. So I think it's more for you going in and being like, look, speaking to whoever you need to about the way that you look after your classes. You are their advocate, and I think it's well worth having conversations with people who are higher than you to have a conversation about, look, they know that most children are now 25% behind educationally, and a large part of that is because body language is 90% of our communication, and you're cutting down a major area of it, and that's not okay for their learning or their global experience of becoming healthy, happy adults. So I think that that's perfectly reasonable, and to bring those into focus is healthy. And then the other side of it is, what are you demonstrating to your children? You're demonstrating when you say to them, you don't have to wear masks in my class. I trust you and you trust me, and I want you to learn in an environment which is safe and structured and where you feel you're getting the best. That lesson says this is an adult who questions a narrative, believes that our needs are paramount compared to other people's, which, let me draw your attention to safeguarding. The safeguarding legislation clearly says that children should be free from harm, abuse and neglect. All we've done to children for 2 years is harm, abuse and neglect them. You're not willing to do that because you are a professional working in that field. You're giving the message to those children that you are willing to stand in your truth and allow them to experience your lessons at least in a safeguarding experience where they feel able to express themselves, safe, they can laugh, they can have that interaction. That's doing more than going to a staff room and having an argument with any head of year will ever do. So you're just allowing them, because what you're saying to them is, I'm a scientist, I don't believe that this is required. Well, that's a powerful motive for children to do their own reasoning. And often it's the actions of others that really transcend the rules and regulations that those around us teach us. It's the people that we trust and the way that they behave that really speaks to us. So I think that drop the anxiety, drop the right, I've got to fight the big picture. Look, I've been there. We've all seen me hit the headlines in ridiculous scenarios where apparently journalists these days need 2 tweets to write their article because literally that's the level of journalism that they think they should be at. says more about them than it does about me. But the point is, we've seen what happens when people do the big picture, you know. I don't care. But the point is, it does affect other people. You're looking at two options. One is the big picture, going and seeing the head, having a row with them, feeling that your contract's not going to get renewed. The second is you're being the kid's advocate, collaborator, educator, mentor, and you're standing in your truth. And one is going to have much bigger impact than the other. You know, let them deal with the politics, although definitely express yourself, because I think that's really important, to express your truth, but do it in a way that's more about, look, this is what the research is saying, and I think we need to think about that on a safeguarding level. No one can argue with that. No one can argue with that. But when it comes down to like the impact, you're having it. You're having the impact in that class, just standing there without that on and letting them know that they don't need it either. Simple as that. And equally, I know that you, if there's a kid in that class who never wants to take it off, would be totally empathic and sympathetic to that. But essentially, that child is also learning from that experience, which is, I can't be afraid of letting other people stand in their truths, and so on and so forth. So I'd say all of those. Hi, Emma. Could you recommend a mindfulness app for my daughter? She is so anxious all the time. It would be on an iPhone, thank you. So first of all, Headspace for kids is good. If she's over 13, probably Headspace. I would also say, you know, I've got some free stuff on my wellbeing channel. It's not a big channel, I've only done it. I've moved some stuff over from my main channel because it's crime now, my main channel. But there are anxiety things for children there. There's like meditations, mindfulness practice. It depends how old she is, but for very young children, there's some there. And for older children, there's some there. And obviously, any of the others can be done if they're over 13 anyway. But things like Headspace for kids is good. There are some others that I'll have to check because I don't know whether they're just on the iPhone or otherwise, but I can come back to you and put some links below. But the main thing is like Headspace for kids is a good one. And I know that because it's done by clinical psychologists. So you've kind of got the weight of that behind you. Right, I will see you again next Monday. If you like crime now, I do my Wednesdays and Sundays. So join me at 7 till 8:30. No, well, it's 7 till 9 sometimes. It's 7 till 8:30, 7 till 9. I do quite long ones. But if you do like crime and do like consistency, come to that as well. It's a good little community. Take care, chaps. Hope you've enjoyed it. And remember, even though we're still where we were, it could be worse. We could be in New Zealand. Sorry if you're listening from New Zealand. We could be in Canada. Sorry if you're listening from Canada. But wow, I thought Boris Johnson was a challenging kind of guy, but now I realise he's quite a libertarian at heart. Good luck to those places. Let's hope it all goes back to normal pretty soon. Take care, chat. See you next week. Bye.